constitute essential business of this committee, that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans, considering the COVID-19 outbreak, and any rule conflicting with governor's executive order permitting electronic meetings must be suspended. So at this point, I just need a second motion.
Second.
Excellent. And then right now we'll do a roll call basically. So you can just say you're here and that you don't have any conflicts of interest. I believe that's what we do at this point. So I could go down alphabetically of everyone who's on the call. Elena.
Here, agree to the motion, no conflicts.
Ash.
Here, agree, and no conflict.
Beth.
Here, agree, no conflicts.
Catherine.
Here, agree to the motion and no conflicts.
Julie.
Here, agree to the motion, no conflicts.
Molly Richard.
Here, agree and no conflicts.
And TJ.
Sorry, one and unmute. Yes, I'm here. No conflicts and agreed.
And I think Jesse, right?
Yep.
Yep, I am also here. No conflict, except I do also work for the contributor. Sometimes people forget that, but I'm not a reporter.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. And TJ, you're good taking notes. I think we kind of just always assume that, but
At one point, I was designated it, and it hasn't changed, so I'm fine.
okay, we
pretty
can always
straightforward.
talk about changing that if you want to.
I'm totally fine with it. So
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Sorry, I'm just a meeting as minute keeper. I am having a hard time finding the agenda. So would someone be able to resend that to you?
I can forward it to you real quick.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
I don't think it was attached to the main email because I don't have it either.
Oh, okay, let's see.
Oh, I think it just went to the chairs originally. Okay, the changed agenda.
Okay, I'll send it to the group.
Thank you, Elena. I can tell you all what it looks like. Basically, first 10 minutes is all this welcome stuff that we do, standing items. And then for the next 50 minutes, we're gonna do the gaps analysis with Katie Kitchen. And then at 10 o'clock, we're gonna go over that that proposal for the Homeless Planning Council and talk about street outreach data with Judy. Is Judy on the call? Or is she just joining us at 10?
Maybe popping on a bit later. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so next, and if you don't have, well, if anyone has the agenda and wants to read that values and equity statement, that would be great. If you don't have it yet, I could read it, or maybe Elena, but do we have a volunteer who's been able to pull up the agenda?
I'm pulling up the list now to send them the agenda, so I don't think anybody has
Okay,
it.
I'll read it. Okay.
Sorry.
We define racism as racial prejudice plus the misuse of power by systems and institutions. Misuse can be intentional or unintentional. We are mindful of the racial inequities across housing, economic mobility, healthcare, criminal justice, and other systems. These all contribute to racial inequities and homelessness. I pledge to stay mindful of the power and privilege that I bring into every space that I enter and conversation that I have. I pledge to actively and intentionally practice anti-racism when participating in data committee meetings, representing this committee and the COC in the community, and in talking about homelessness and housing issues in Nashville. And lastly, just a quick question about the minutes from the last meeting. Did we send them out to the?
That I really don't know. Anybody get them?
Oh, I feel like you usually attach them to the same email that you send the new agenda with. So
Yeah.
it's probably in the same black hole wherever that is.
Okay, then that would be, you might just want to move that to next month's agenda so that people have
Okay.
to look them over.
Okay. All right. Well, then we're ahead in our agenda. And Katie Kitchen, Katie was on our call, I think a couple months ago now. But Katie, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself, and I'll briefly mention that what we're going to talk about today with Katie is related to items 1.1D and 1.3F in our strategic plan. And that is evaluating inventories based on who the low-income housing is serving, and then also housing units and services for families meeting the LEA definition of homelessness. So we got an introduction from Katie before, and we didn't have enough time to really get into it, and today we're giving that time.
Thanks. And I'm wondering if you need to pass me the ball so I can share my screen. I don't seem to have that option at this point. While she's doing that, so I'm Katie Kitchen. I'm the director of CSH, which stands for Corporation for Supportive Housing for Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. I live in Cincinnati, but I work in all three places. I was formerly the head of the Memphis and Shelby County COC as executive director of Community Alliance for the Homeless in Memphis prior to moving here to Cincinnati. So I've got a little bit of Tennessee cred, hopefully. And right now, CSH is using some grant funds that we have from a national foundation to just basically cover my time and help advance supportive housing policy or programs across the 3 states that we work. So we're able to work with you for a bit, and just a little bit about what my work is. I do basically a third is housing development. So we help, we have what we call supportive housing institutes. We put together local development teams and nonprofit partners to create supportive housing. I do a third managing reentry housing programs across the state. We have about 600 people we house each year coming out of state prison in supportive and rapid rehousing programs. And then a third technical assistance, mostly HUD lately with all the CARES Act work. So that's a little bit about me, and thanks for having me today. It's good to reconnect with a bunch of folks. This is an update also of work we did. It was December of, I think, 19. So a year and a half ago, basically, where we took the first crack at data. I understand there's work going on with the Stella P tools, so those were not available to us this time. So we'll talk a little bit about the data source for this. And it looks like I am now in sharing mode.
Katie, I'm going to break in. This is Susie.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell the rest of you all what Stella P is. It's a visualization tool that that can show graphically the data that's in the HMIS system.
Thanks. All right. So the purpose of this is to think about how the inventory and people flow through your system, and what are the gaps that would be needed to make homelessness rare, brief, in one time. All right. So what we're hoping to accomplish in this next 30 minutes or so is to just do a quick gut check on the data that's loaded into these spreadsheets that comes up with the gap analysis. There are a lot of assumptions that are made that you all may have different information or ideas on how we should calculate those. So that's really important that we spend some time talking about those today, because they make big changes in the data depending on the assumptions that you make. And then we'll adjust. I have the spreadsheet up, so I can make changes to it, and we can see what the resulting gap projections are based on that. And then, of course, we will look at what the data tells us on the housing intervention needs for your community. So the data sources I used, thank you to Susie and her HMIS team, and the mission. So we have annualized data from the mission, which I did not have access to last time. So that was sort of a big help. looking at both their single and their women's programs that include families. So we used actual annualized data from the mission, which was helpful. We have the 2020 PIT and HIC data. And then we also have, the HMIS team was able to run an annualized performance report for emergency shelter and transitional housing programs. And Susie just reminded me that that does include room in the inn. So we have, I think the bulk of your annualized shelter data, which adding what's in HMIS with the mission should give a decent picture of the number of households that come through your system each year. And then big question marks around rapid rehousing. So this is a weird year, obviously, with a huge increase in rapid rehousing slots that are available through ESGCV, whether they're rental assistance programs that are connected to your homeless system. It's very hard to make a projection of what your existing capacity is with so much variation. So we'll talk about what you think makes sense to assume is an ongoing capacity. Any questions about this data before I move on?
I think if I can just add,
Yeah.
because this is sort of related to the other big sort of conversation we're having now and why we extended the agenda. So for reference, Stella should be reflective of the work we're doing. However, we're working really hard to increase our coverage from agencies doing this work. And so Katie had to pull from all sorts of sources rather than being able to lean on Stella, which should theoretically reflect the work we do. So I wanted to just tie those things together for the committee.
Yep, and hopefully soon we'll all be in one system. And street outreach. I did not pull an APR for street outreach. There's a lot of questions about whether that's the best way to count unsheltered homelessness in the communities on an annualized basis or not, and we'll have a conversation about that in a minute. All right, so this is your PIT data. This should look familiar. I came out of your HDX system. So this is, we really focus on households versus people. So you'll see that when we do the annualized data. So this is not, no surprise here. And then this is the big important calculation. So this is your annualized number, and this is based on actuals of the mission and the HMIS reports on how many households entered your shelter system or your transitional housing system in calendar 2020. So the big picture number is you had 7881 non-chronic households, and then some assumptions that were made are the basically how many annualized chronically homeless people you have, and then what the annualized unsheltered number. Those are the two multipliers I used, even though in the spreadsheet it refers to calculations that we can use as multipliers if we have to. I did not use those annualized multiplier for PIT because we had the actual data. So those purple numbers you can ignore. The ones I did use a multiplier on were the chronically homeless individuals and unsheltered. So I did, for chronically homeless, there was an old USICH tool that came out of, gosh, probably 5 years ago that suggested the multiplier for chronics. So if your PIT counts 500 people, how many people over the course of the year are going to become chronically homeless? USICH basically said it was a 25% increase over your PIT. There's been a lot of thinking about whether that's understating the number of people who become chronically homeless. The number I have used for this chart is 1.58. So a 58% increase from the PIT to take into account undercounting the day of the count as well as annualized newly chronically homeless people. So I want to stop on that for a second and hear what you all think. It it doesn't make a huge difference as far as calculating the interventions, because the number of chronically homeless is, of course, a subsection or a subset of your overall people who experience homelessness in the year. It's a small subset. I think in your case it was 10%. But I just want to make sure if you all have better ideas on what that multiplier should be. I want to pause and get some thoughts on that point right here. What do you guys think? What should the multiplier for chronically homeless be in Nashville?
I'm not sure I've got an answer for that, but I've got a question about why are you not using a multiplier for the pit?
Because we had actual data on annualized households this year.
Annualized households who use shelter.
Correct. Yep. So I used a multiplier for unsheltered and chronic.
Okay, for unsheltered. Okay, fine.
What are people's thoughts about the multiplier for chronic of 1.58? You want to go down to 1.25? Do you think that makes more sense? Do you think 1.58 makes more sense?
I don't know if I have an answer, but I mean, just considering the people that we work with at Park Center who we be doing outreach, I would say the majority of the people we serve are chronically homeless. So, yeah, again, I'm not sure how to answer the question because it's really a guess, right?
It is. That's the problem, but I don't want to guess on your behalf. So, I mean, so think about it. Like I was sharing with Susie. So I used to do street outreach in Memphis 1 day a week. And so I was trying to put in my head, like, of the day of the count, how many of the unsheltered and chronic people would we catch on the day of the count? So there's obviously a multiplier around people that we just can't find the day of the count. And then how many new people show up, both unsheltered and chronically homeless throughout the course of the year. And of course, it's a very hard guess to make. I'm guessing 3 times the number of unsheltered for Nashville. I went a little higher because it does seem like your unsheltered number was just higher. So the question around that is that a pretty fixed population? Are these your encamped folks and they are pretty constant, or is this more than I was putting in the sort of the country music stardom group, like there's a group that just finds their way to Nashville each year and winds up unsheltered. So I went a little higher than I might for another community, reflecting that it's just kind of an unusual, your city has a bit of unusual characteristics around unsheltered homelessness. But again, these are a guess. So I'd be interested in what you think on the 3 times multiplier for unsheltered and the 1.58. Or the other thing is we can just go through and you can see where this landed. And then if you're like, oh my God, that's way off, we can go back.
Well, we have some information about unsheltered. We know from the questionnaire data that the median time that people have been on the streets is under a year. And so that suggests a turnover. We have at least twice that many people out there, and then we miss some. And so your multiplier of 3 seems plausible. On chronic, it's harder for me to say. Obviously, by definition, folks who have chronic patterns of homelessness don't turn over as fast as people who don't have chronic patterns. 1.2 seems too low to me, but 1.6 might be about right. 1.58 seems like pseudo precision, but that's okay.
Yeah, that came from somewhere. I think I was trying to remember if that had come out of the work here or if I use this tool with other communities too. It may have been an actual calculation from another community.
I mean, the other data point we have are the people who die. And we had about 140 die on our streets, homeless last year. Now, some of those have been sheltered, but and we don't have good information about the overlap between those people and the people who get into our coordinated entry or outreach systems. But a lot of them don't seem to be known to homeless service agencies. You know, we get folks from indigent burial that we didn't get from any outreach program. But how to translate that into numbers?
But doesn't that just translate into going with the higher multiplier versus a lower multiplier?
Yes.
Okay.
But how much higher?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I'd be curious if Jesse has any thoughts. I'll call you out, Jesse, but I know you see a lot of people in your program. And Martina, too.
Yeah, I would definitely go with the higher rather than the lower. I think that's more accurate.
So I'll just go back. So your chronic PIT number was 533 and your annualized is 831. So that's what the multiplier did.
I think that we have to start somewhere.
Okay.
Again, I like everybody else, I don't have the answer, but I think I would err on the higher rather than the lower, just to make sure that we are capturing. We can always go down, I'm guessing.
Right. Well, you can go either way.
Either way, yeah.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
To your numbers. Okay.
But also we need some guidance because you know, and this is I think the value that you bring is to kind of help us to kind of know what's a realistic multiplier too. So thank you for that.
All right. Well, we'll move on. And oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the vast majority of people that we encounter in street outreach are on the chronic end.
And do you know what your annual encounters are?
No, because we just started tracking that. We just started getting street outreach money.
Well, yay for that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave it here for now. As I said, we can revisit it once we see what the calculations come up with. All right. So here are the assumptions piece. In addition to assumptions we're making on multipliers for unsheltered and chronic, this is this is where the numbers will swing wildly. So what is plugged in here? If you guys have worked with Barb Poppy before, she and I did a big project a couple years ago and used this data as kind of, thinking about patterns of homelessness, that there's a group that will basically hit the shelter system for a short period of time and then not return. In communities that are sort of more rich as far as the housing interventions, that will change. So I think this is probably on the low end of assumptions for self-resolve. So in other words, if I were in East Coast, New York, something like that, where there's a lot more resources, there may be more supportive housing, there may be more access to subsidies of different types, your self-resolve is going to be lower because people will take advantage of those resources. In the Deep South, where there's less financial interventions, people are going to self-resolve because they have to. There's no other choice. So those numbers are going to be higher. So this is kind of I would say on a, This assumes a more rich housing intervention environment. And so I think this one is one you might want to think about playing around with as we go forward. Right now, I have 45% of non-chronic individuals self-resolving and 35% of non-chronic, but I also have a diversion number. So when the GAPS calculation is run, it's going to remove self-resolved and remove diverted. So you basically add those two numbers together. So 20% won't enter shelter in the first place, and then 45% will self-resolve. So that's a universe of 65% for the single individuals who do not require a financial intervention in order to leave homelessness. So, we've got a national expert on the call, which is always helpful. So I'll stop there and put Beth on the spot and see what does that seem like? If we had Stella P, we might actually be able to know with more precision.
So we don't have a robust diversion program here. We certainly have homeless people experience homelessness and never make it into shelter. But I wonder if you want to add those, or you want to say 45% of the 80%.
Bump it up, move the 45% to 80% and take out divert.
No, I was thinking that your 45% was of those people who were not diverted.
Right.
And so you wouldn't then add those numbers together because it would be 45% of 80%.
Oh, yes. 20%. Right.
But I don't know that. What do people think? Do we divert people? We leave people in doubled up situations.
And I'm sorry. So I should clarify. So this is actually the gap analysis is going to say you could divert 20%, and we'll give you it helps you think about what you would need to do to divert 20%. So there's some amount of financial assistance, there's some amount of mediation. So it's not meant to reflect this particular chart can be informed by actual practice, but it also can be, let's put a placeholder here for diversion activities that should be employed, if that makes sense.
So if we were to try diversion, we might be able to divert 20% of people who would otherwise knock on our shelter door.
Right.
I think I did prevention and diversion for a while, and there is some diversion that takes place, but it's almost unintentional, where it's people that are just self-resolving, and some of the folks that disappear, a lot of times it's because they move out of state and they don't tell anybody, and sometimes it's to go back home or go somewhere else. But yeah, I would definitely affirm it's an incredibly hard number to estimate, because it's also fluctuating, because a lot of folks that divert move in with somebody, but then they get kicked out in a few months. And then they're back in the shelter, and it may look like they're a new person if it's not fully tracked.
I was going to say the same thing, TJ. A lot of the people who self-resolve come right back to the streets months later or years later. We have people who, like, we have a client who moved to Florida to live with his daughter. We were so happy. He'd been chronically homeless for years in Nashville. Then he called me 9 months later. I'm back. Can y'all help me? I'm like, oh, okay. And that's pretty normal. We see the same people over, or they, go stay with a family member in town, but then they get kicked out, or whatever happens. So
I'll chime in from the education perspective, where we recognize doubled up as a homeless category. And unlike Beth, I am far from a national expert. But as we look at this chart, to me, talking about self-resolving and diversion, just like Molly and TJ are saying, they're not really resolving. They're just delaying the inevitable. And so I just, from the community perspective, that discussion really causes me great concern, because we, pat ourselves on the back for people who self-resolve or people who get diverted, but it's really, we're just finding a way to not count them. And so for part of a community conversation, I just think we need to be a bit more honest with ourselves about that. Is, calling someone self-resolving because they don't enter and we don't count them doesn't make me feel very good about our community efforts.
And also to go with that, one of the issues is for those of us who have to use governmental standards, that say once someone is living with their family member, they're no longer considered homeless, so we cannot fund them. So it's a problem on that end too, where our hands are just immediately tied.
And the kinds of housing situations that people can access after they've been homeless are pretty bad often.
All right, well, we'll leave self-resolve and diversion where they are right now. I'll show you where that lands you, because that's where it starts to go, oh my gosh, we can't do that. All right, and then the other, I think these are less controversial. The PSH, so 90% of all chronically homeless would need PSH to exit homelessness. And then then 10% of non-chronically homeless would need PSH to exit homelessness. The group that needs affordable housing gets lumped, but not the intensive services in order to maintain housing. Those get lumped into the rapid rehousing or other permanent housing slots. So that's a different group. So this is just the PSH group. So again, it's 90% of chronic and 10% of non-chronic. So with families, because so few families hit the chronic designation, there may be conversations about whether that number is too low. In my opinion, it is too low. This is conservative on PSH, but because PSH is so expensive, there's a pressure to keep that number low. But I think if you think about the typology work that Culhane did, there's also that question of families that are higher need aren't necessarily the ones that get placed into higher intensity interventions. But I think his number was like 30% of families had significant, were PSH type households. We have this number here at 10%. So anyway, I throw that to you for consideration. That's the plug number in here. Basically a very conservative PSH need.
Hey, Katie.
Yeah.
Are we going with the definition that HUD has for permanent supportive housing? So all of those folks would have to have a disability. There would have to be a disability.
Disabling, a member of the household has to have a disabling condition. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I would actually also think that the non-chronic number should be higher, honestly.
Who need PSH?
Correct.
For families and singles?
For families and singles, I think that's partly because, but it may not, they may actually be chronic, but they may not be reflected as chronic. And that's kind of what I'm worried about. We have a lot of people that are on disability income, and in Nashville, that does not make housing affordable. So they all need PSH, and there's a lot of people that are, quote unquote, non-chronic that would fall in that gap.
So let's make sure, though, I just want to double check. You're different, that there is a group that needs long-term affordability that would be covered in another subgroup, which is they're lumped together as rapid rehousing or other permanent housing. So it's not just the affordability gap. This is the group that has it's that two-thumb test. We say without the subsidy, they would be on the street, and without the intensive supports, they would not be able to maintain their housing. So the PSH group should be limited to those folks who need the intensive services and the affordability. So I throw that back. You may still say it's too low.
Yeah, I think it is the same. I get that. So in here, this would be thinking of something more like shelter plus care and not Section 8?
Right. Correct.
Okay. I think we rely a lot on Section 8, but I do think a lot of the people in Section 8 really do need those services. We just don't have them available for them.
And that kind of brings up with the fact that I think we're probably undercounting the number of chronic, and we probably will, even if everything was in HMIS. The hoops that agencies have to jump through to document someone's chronicity are insane. And so agencies that don't have to do that and can still get their families and individuals into housing are not documenting chronic, because it's stupidly hard. And so I think that chronic number that was mentioned before is probably higher, just as a caveat.
Except that there is a lot of turnover. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there's an awful lot of people who come into homelessness and say that they've been there fairly recently at the point we encounter them.
Well, I think you could go up to 15%. You wouldn't want to go any higher than that, because then it's just I think you're over identifying PSH need. You can, another sort of counter measure for this is your either wait list or your assessment tools. What is the annualized number of people who are scoring in the PSH range? We can use that to see if we're in the ballpark or not. Does anybody have that number? And we don't have to fix this in today and then never revisit it. This is a starting point to have a conversation. If you guys want to pull that that data from your assessment tools, we can look at it. Of course, there are a lot of challenges around the validity of whether that assessment tool is finding the right people or not. So many unknowns. But I do think the family chronic or the family PSH number is quite conservative in this. If it were me, I would bump that one up. I'm not sure about bumping up the non-chronic individuals, maybe to 15%, but you're going to see when we get to what the tool produces as far as the number of units you need to hit, you're already so far out of what is feasible for unless there's a dramatic change in the financing and subsidies available in the country. So anyway, we'll go through, we'll finish this exercise to show you what these assumptions generate, and then we can go back and revisit, and you can see what would happen if we made different assumptions. Anyone feel strongly about any of these before I move on? Or have other questions?
Makes sense to start.
Okay.
Makes sense to start somewhere.
Yeah. Right. It's our only choice. Okay. All right. And then, as I said, this is classified as rapid rehousing, but it also includes other permanent housing. So it could be a public housing unit. It could be subsidy, Section 8 voucher, low-income housing tax credit property that has a more affordable or income-based housing. So that is the group of people that was left when we took out the self-resolve, we took out the PSH, we took out the diverted group. These are people that go through the shelter system or identified as unsheltered and require some sort of intervention to leave homelessness, whether it be a rapid rehousing slot, a subsidy of other kind, a VASH voucher, that group that doesn't need the intensive services, but just needs the affordability addressed. And this is your biggest group of people.
So here's where I want to quarrel, because lumping rapid rehousing and permanent subsidies together are lumping two very different kinds of interventions, one of which has been shown to work beautifully, at least in the case of families, and another of which has been shown not to work. And so we're kind of putting together things that are not equivalent, and giving people a rapid rehousing subsidy, and as Susie said once years ago, slamming the door and, you know, turning the other way before they fall out. It's
Yeah.
Hey,
So
Beth,
I'm totally willing to break out this category and make subgroups that are just sort of in the deep poverty category and need long-term affordability, and rapid rehousing may not be enough. We could definitely do that.
I think that would be important. I think because rapid rehousing has become such a buzzword, at least within HUD, and some other kind of fields, that people seeing that these units should be rapid rehousing are not going to think that this could be permanent housing with a long-term subsidy, which is a very different approach to me.
Yeah.
But when you were talking about the two things, one that works and one that doesn't, would you just briefly talk about what we, express what those two approaches are?
so among families nationally recruited in homeless shelters after a stay of a week, folks who got priority access to housing subsidies resolved their housing choice vouchers, long-term renewable subsidies, resolved their homelessness to a great extent. Now, not everybody who got priority access was able to lease up with a landlord. Of those who succeeded in doing that, of using a subsidy to lease up, we had, continual housing to 85 or 90% 3 years later. Of those who got rapid rehousing, well over a third were homeless or doubled up 3 years later, which is pretty much what it looked like if they just went through shelters. So the rapid rehousing bought no additional housing stability 20 months out or 37 months out compared to usual care. And the housing choice vouchers, for most people, ended homelessness without additional kinds of services. Now, this is families, not single individuals. I think single individuals both have more folks with the kinds of serious disabilities that are going to need permanent supportive housing, and more folks who, with a rapid rehousing subsidy, might be able to, that might be enough to enable them to flourish or at least stay housed in the community.
Okay, so since this analysis is homeless system focused and we can't control the affordability question, would it be fair to say a third or 60% of the rapid rehousing, and then the remaining group would need the other affordability? Ideally, everybody would get access to a voucher or long-term affordability, but we can control funding of slots that are ESG or COC funded. So
there is right now a city affordable housing task force. Again, this is not the first time Nashville has done this, and it might be worth having a stake in the ground to say, we need this level of ongoing subsidies. I mean, too much of the talk about affordability is at 60% or 80% of area median. It's not our folks who
right.
are much lower than that. But it might be a good time to have kind of a stake in the ground to say this is the need, even if we don't have the resources to meet that need. I wouldn't dial back on what we think the need is, because we don't control the resources. We need to find the resources.
Fair point. Okay, so to present this data, then we would say this group, which is the 2970 singles and 249 families, we would say ideally all 3,200 of those, or whatever that number is, would need long-term affordability, and then we could do
in
sorry.
this with rapid we have rapid rehousing funds now, and I would guess that probably, we're going to work on this, but I would say about 90% of them need a long-term subsidy. The rapid rehousing is
y'all need to talk to HUD.
I agree, Jesse. I 100% agree. People are not going to be able to afford their rapid rehousing after the subsidy is over. And Section 8 has been, like, as someone who supervises housing navigators, Section 8 is like the best for us to house people, unless they have serious criminal history, but that's our most successful way of housing.
So let's put that at, this is the group that isn't so-called self-resolving. We've already got the folks who could manage, however they manage, without getting subsidies. Do we want to say that 90% need the long-term subsidy? Do you think that that number would dial back to 80% for non-chronic individuals or 70% for non-chronic individuals and be up at 90% for families? What do you think?
I think if we want the non-chronically homeless people to stay housed, yeah, that number needs to be higher, because if they don't have the long-term subsidy, that they could easily fall back into homelessness.
Higher as a percent or higher?
Oh, higher percent. I think you were saying like 80% or.
But so it should be higher than 80%?
Oh, no, sorry. I'm the higher range. So like,
okay.
80% sounds okay to me.
So let me just throw the counterpoint in, which is that you also have data. I haven't, since we don't have recent Stella P for you guys, I don't have it for your community, but in other communities we've looked at, there's, the recidivism returns to homelessness post rapid rehousing, right? So that number within the 12-24 month period is usually pretty low. Family option study group aside, what HMIS shows. And of course, you can quickly point holes into that, which is that, people who are failing in rapid rehousing may not come to the attention of the homeless system again. They may just move in with family and friends. They may be in substandard housing. It's the failure rate of rapid rehousing is certainly understated in those HMIS reports, but typically, it's 5% in the first year, 10% within 24 months. It's definitely a low number, certainly not 80 to 90%, right? So that's the counter argument. And please shoot at me now.
I want to run this back in time.
What you said, people don't re-enter into HMIS programs after they've left rapid rehousing or can't afford the unit anymore. They're going into more like the nonprofit charities that deal with prevention, not necessarily HUD prevention, but deal with those kinds of things. So they're not getting tracked in that way, even though they're they're basically subsidizing their housing month to month through different charities, if they're able to sustain their housing at all. So I think that's part of what's not being captured. And I don't know, are you guys tracking in HMIS, like when someone was in rapid rehousing and then 6 months later they're showing them back up in prevention? Is it catching that?
Our data right now that we have access to is definitely not, but I know Susie's working on this. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's a big part of the conversation we're going to have with Judy. So right now we have very low participation in HMIS in regards to street outreach projects and emergency shelter projects, which is how we would evaluate recidivism. So we don't have that availability right now.
Well, and add to that, when I was doing prevention work, my grant was fully funded through United Way, so it wasn't required by my agency to enter any of the prevention data into HMIS, and that's the same for most of Catholic Charities' work as well, and I know a few other agencies. So the majority of the people doing that work, NeedLink and others, they don't touch HMIS, and they don't even know how to use it.
Hit me up. I'll set up a project for anyone.
I think Ash was trying to give us a 10-minute warning about.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, all right. I'm going to push us through so you can see where we landed, and then I'm clear that I'm going to restate the different intervention recommendations between affordable and wrapper rehousing as being two different categories, and then you all can give me feedback as to what the right breakout you think that will be. All right, so this is where with all those assumptions baked in, this is where you land, which is that you're pretty okay on family PSH units. And again, remember that assumption was very conservative, only 10% of the non-chronic families needing PSH. I would change that if I were you to go higher. The PSH need for individuals, annually 1,149 of your whatever 10,000 people, I think we said, pretty close to 10,000, 1,149 need PSH, and you're only generating about 195 at a 18% turnover rate in your PSH units. So you're extremely short in PSH. You need 954. This is just a 1-year number. Wrapper rehousing, you needed another 96. And again, remember, this is lumping together all affordable and wrapper rehousing, almost 3,000 or over 3,000 between singles and families. And then the worst stressful thing is your 5-year number, which is you need 3,200 units of PSH over 5 years, and then 12,000 need affordable or rapid.
I still think we should shoot high on the PSH also because right now the city is not allocating all available PSH to prioritize for people experiencing homelessness. So we could be using more of our units for this problem. And if we show that we need so much more, that might help persuade the homeless prioritization for people that are applying to public housing is what I'm talking about. Most of our public housing units are coming out on a first come, first serve basis for signups. And obviously people experiencing homelessness don't have computers and don't sign up quickly. So they are not benefiting from those programs. So I think the more that we can show a higher need, the better with PSH. So that's just my opinion.
So I didn't catch how you went from 1 year to 5 year, and it seems like it should be different for chronic and non-chronic people, is it? That is, people who are chronic by definition, I hate to use this language, but anyway, the people classified as chronic by definition have been out there for a while. And so it takes a while for somebody to become chronic. And so it's more of a finite population, whereas people who are not long-termers by definition are turning over faster. And I'm just wondering whether your assumptions are different there.
Oh yeah, no. So this is a this is a very flat calculation, which is using that 1.58 and then a fixed population overall. So if, for example, in year 1, you brought on 1,000 units and you caught the vast majority of the chronic people in your system, then
we'd still generate more next year, but not as many.
Not as many, exactly. Exactly. Right. So this assumes a fixed rate of capacity and a fixed flow in of chronicity. So if you can definitely play around with those, this is a super simplistic way of doing it, but it's just because the development timelines for PSH are so long. We have found communities want something more than a 1-year need picture. So we just did a very flat calculation. It is not sophisticated at all.
We've got about 3 minutes left of this section.
Yeah.
I agree on upping that family number like you suggested as well.
Yeah. Okay, so my takeaways for the short term are I'm going to increase the family PSH need I'm hearing at least some people calling to increase the single PSH need, but certainly breaking out the wrapper rehousing into affordability, with the bulk of people needing a long-term affordability and a smaller subset needing wrapper rehousing. Do you guys want to say 70 affordable, 30 wrapper rehousing? What do you all think?
I would do 75, 25.
I mean, there was also a 90% suggestion too. So we're somewhere between 75 and 90.
Yeah.
Or 80-20.
80-20.
Are we different for individuals and for families? That is, do we think
You
that,
can be, yeah.
but I'm sort of asking the group, whether families as a group need something more than individuals who don't have disabilities? I'm not hearing any resounding response to that, so let's just use one figure.
It's hard. I don't work with families, so it's hard for me to know their specific need. TJ, don't you have?
Sorry, I was communicating with a toddler. What was the question?
Should there be a different calculation for affordable versus wrapper rehousing between singles and families?
I mean, the biggest issue with families is size. So I mean, like if I'm reading all of this data incorrectly, you're just doing head of household. You're not doing units in a family, correct?
It is units. These are
Okay.
all households.
I'm sorry. I mean, like individuals in a household.
No.
That is not here. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, like we work with families as small as 2, and as we've had people that are 11 or 13. So I mean, when you factor in trying to find a building that has rooms for a 13-person family, it's effectively impossible. But yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest issue we run into is, I mean, how do you make rapid rehousing and all of these things work for a 2-person family versus an 8-person or more family? So it's hard to gauge just based off that. A lot of times also, one of the things that we say, most of the families are often not chronic. If there's a situation where someone still has custody of their children or is still in a full contingent family unit, it's usually for whatever reason they may have better coping skills, they may not have run into as dramatic of things, but they're often easier clients than I've interacted with individuals. So it makes it a little bit easier for landlords to get along with them. That's just that's not qualitative data by any means, but it's what we've experienced at least. So yeah, as far as a number, it's incredibly hard to gauge because we have some that desperately need permanent supportive housing, which doesn't exist effectively for families. But we also have families who we help once, move them into housing, and we don't hear from them again until they say, "Hey, my daughter just graduated college." So.
Yep, and interestingly, like if you just look at eviction data, the families are being evicted. It seems faster. That's sort of the bigger universe of people being evicted right now. But in my experience running rapid rehousing programs, we had a 65% failure rate for singles in rapid rehousing versus 25% for families. So, substance use being the primary reason for eviction in that rapid rehousing program for singles. That's a very small. It was a small program, so and I don't know what the national average is singles versus families of rapid rehousing failure. But
well, I mean, sorry, there's other factors that tie in too, just when you have children, because if your 17-year-old daughter does something, they're going to put you all out. Or I had a client that I had to divert who was being evicted because their 7-year-old accidentally set fire to trash. And they said, this is what happened. He was a 7-year-old. He found a match. And so he set a piece of paper on fire and then he freaked out. So what do you do with things when you don't want them? You throw it in the trash, and it set fire to an entire dumpster. And so she got evicted. So I mean, like, she didn't have any issues, but once you throw in the, you know, children, such as a toddler yelling in the background, like, I mean, it changes everything.
I just want to say we're 3 minutes over.
We're out of time. Yep, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, Katie, it's been really amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. All right, well, I'll make these changes and send them over to you, and then you all can communicate if you want further adjustments. How about that?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's
Thank you.
Thank you.
And a conversation.
And great to be with you all. All right, take care. Bye.
Bye, Katie. So Judy's here now. Welcome, Judy.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. And it was interesting to listen in to part of, just bear with me 1 second. I got an urgent text cold weather related. I need to respond. Just 1 second.
Sharday, while she's doing that, would you mind passing me the presenter privilege and I can pull up some info?
I'm gonna run grab more coffee, but I'll be right back.
So that was probably the little mental break for all of you to shift. But it was interesting enough to see how connected my ask really is to what your discussion was. And it's all about data and how we improve data collection, that we continuously kind of can better identify where our gaps are, where we need to invest more, and come with a comprehensive plan as part of our housing crisis resolution system. So we at MHID are working right now with Nashville Rescue Mission on implementing a release of information to get their data into HMAS. So that's a process, as you can imagine, to just, I mean, they're willing to give us the data, but we need the release of information first from all the people and how that's done and have a whole process. So we're working on that with them right now. And also I do have, I have this delayed, but I do look over the winter at aggregate shelter data from shelters. So the data in a shelter, just cumulative, gives me a little bit of a sense of what sheltering looks like, how many people are utilizing beds, and we've done that for years. But I wanted to pitch it to Shanley right now to give you an update of the data that we currently have from outdoor homelessness.
Yes, I also felt like Katie's conversation was a great example of our need for data. So Stella P, the tool that she kept referring to, is a tool that HUD uses from data exclusively from HMIS. So when she talks about how other communities, she's using that as a baseline, we can't. So HUD TA comes here and asks for that sort of information. And typically we have to piece things together as a starting point, which I think is hard. It was hard for me to guess with her about homelessness in Nashville. So I'm going to pull up some slides that Rachel had put together, and I know you can see the whole thing. I'm sorry. So this is information regarding street outreach information that we had available to us through HMIS. So in 2019, this is a comprehensive list of all of the agencies that we had entering any information in a street outreach project. So we have lots of folks that do street outreach, but right now most of their efforts are only captured in coordinated entry, which is very, very important for resources and referrals. However, it is not used in a reporting way. It's not reliable for that. It is really meant exclusively to be the way in which we help our people experiencing housing crisis access resources. So in 2019, we had 494 people known in HMIS to have received some sort of street outreach service. In 2020, you can see we about doubled that number and about doubled the agencies participating in street outreach data entry. You can see a big chunk of that is specifically connected with the ESG CV funding that we recently got. So most of these entries actually happened from October to December of 2020. Yes, so moving on. So this is, the gray bars are 2019 and the blue are 2020. So you can see here that in coordinated entry in 2019, we knew of 2,780 people that were experiencing literal homelessness. And of those people, only 494 were reportable, essentially. So when HUD looks at our system, they only saw this fraction of the work that we know is happening. So that's 17% of the total people experiencing literal homelessness that are captured in our reports. And then in 2020, we had 996, which brought us to about 40% coverage. And that's only coverage compared to coordinated entry, which we also know isn't totally comprehensive of the number of people experiencing homelessness. From conversations with lots of agencies that participate in HMIS, we know that not everyone that they are working with is entered into coordinated entry. So it's just the best we have right now to compare against. So I also, and I know several of you have been in this pitch or conversation before, but the reason that we're pushing this so hard right now is because we just transitioned to data sharing. And so this becomes much simpler of an ask for agencies. This isn't duplicative data entry like it would have been prior to data sharing. Okay, sending it back to Judy, unless there are any specific questions about the data.
Did you factor in duplicates, like in the street outreach numbers that you had for 2020, like if somebody's in multiple programs?
Yes, that was deduplicated.
Okay.
Cool. If you could send me the presenter ball. So basically, I'm here today because I would like for this committee, the data committee, to consider to make a recommendation to the Homelessness Planning Council, for the Homelessness Planning Council to endorse sending the following message. And let me share my screen back out to the community provider. So then will be okay, and this is actually, I think this is an old version, because we also, and here's why I'm changing this, because this is the feedback that we got from the point in time count committee to include the term strongly. The HPC should strongly encourage that all outreach groups participate in data collection through HMIS to ensure that Nashville has a solid assessment of the outdoor homelessness situation in Nashville. So basically the ask from the Homelessness Planning Council would be to organizations with professional street outreach services to enter data into HMIS/coordinated entry and work with the Homeless Impact Commission to do so with the goal to be able to pull the first monthly street outreach report through HMIS by the end of April. That report then should show aggregate and duplicate numbers of people living outdoors, gender, race, age, length of homelessness, veteran status, income/benefits, disabilities, etc. So I'm going to keep this open here for a little bit. We are actually, and as you heard, we've already asked the point in time committee to endorse this, which they have, and they entered the word strongly in that ask. We're coming to you today, and we're also going to go to the HMS Oversight Committee to endorse this recommendation to the Homelessness Planning Council as well. Collecting accurate data, as you know, is a community task. As the HMS lead, the Homeless Impact Division administers HMS on behalf of the community, but it is really the COC's responsibility to ensure our community has a functioning HMS. The Homelessness Planning Council is charged with conducting the business on behalf of the COC. And as a committee, you are charged to help do the work and offer recommendations to the Homelessness Planning Council to move that work forward. And that is why I'm coming to committees to really follow that process, make the community ask from the community. As you know, the point in time count offers a snapshot that's taken once per year. And this year had accepted that Nashville did not hold the outdoor pig count. And our justification was due to COVID, we canceled that pig count. But we also know because of COVID, the landscape of homelessness has completely changed. We see fewer people in shelters. We see more people outdoors. And we also have an increased housing placement rate since October due to the implementation of the Emergency Solutions COVID grant. So right now, it's really hard to figure out what outdoor homelessness really looks like. It's hard to predict. So with that, this ask is becoming that much more important. In addition, HUD is not, I just want to stress, HUD is not punishing communities that are not doing a point in time count, but in that waiver request email or email alerting HUD that we would not have an outdoor count, the response from HUD SNAP's office was, and I quote here, "It sounds like you have continued street outreach efforts to help you understand the unsheltered population. We encourage you to evaluate that data regularly to understand changes in your unsheltered population." So that is what we are asking for, is really to do just that, to really get the data as best as we can and use HMS as the tool to do so. With this data, our community and individual nonprofits can tell policymakers at the local, state, and national level what our needs are. We can ask for more targeted funding. We also can counteract wrong information that right now is floating out there by loud community voices, including a few policymakers, let me tell you, because I hear from them. And we can, those information, anything that's just not accurate right now around encampments is really used to push for encampment closures. And we get those nearly daily. And this also, having accurate data will provide a chance for us to show HUD how we improving. And that's what HUD wants to see. They want to see how we improve our system. They measure us against each other, against ourselves. They really look at Nashville is improving. So if there's additional funding, they deserve additional funding. That's kind of what they're looking at. If they're bonus projects, if we're doing well, we have a higher chance to get bonus projects. Those are the type of things that this will do. We have already, or I've really listened to concerns from nonprofits pushing back on some of the data entry. One, burden on outreach workers. And then the other main pushback is also what happens when people are in HMS. Are they just added to a wait list and nothing happens? So my counter arguments to that is we need community standards developed with input from outreach workers. We have already started that work last year and then COVID hit. So let's pick that back up. And as part of that community standards, it's also how do we assess who's working, programs have to assess who they're working with. So why not include in that assessment an HMAS entry? Then also I have counted about how many full-time positions there are at professional full-time outreach workers. And we have a minimum of about 40 FTEs right now at organizations who do outreach regularly. So with that, then the burden really isn't as high as you'd think. Simple calculations would be just an estimate because I don't know what the numbers look like, but it's really, if you divvy it up and you coordinate the effort, it's very doable that by the end of April, we pretty much have a solid number, and on a monthly basis, people can be entered. Also, with the ESG grant showed that when people are entered regularly in HMAS, and then with that into coordinated entry as well, that it's been already in there. So some of these dollars, when the $10 million came through, one of the requirements is that our community uses coordinated entry. While having the people already in there is actually would be helpful, and would be more equitable, I believe, than the way we had to struggle to get more people entered. Just for this round, it should be an ongoing effort for our community. It allows us to do this gaps analysis, needs assessment, showing what's really going on. And that's kind of why I am coming to you and ask for endorsing this ask as a committee, sending up to the Homelessness Planning Council, and then for the Homelessness Planning Council to send it out to outreach groups. And that is my presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in.
Got about 1 minute left in this section, but I know we have 10 minutes for the agenda.
I think that sounds good. I also don't think it would hurt to ask more of the outreach agencies, whether they're quote unquote professional street outreach or just volunteer street outreach, to be adding information into HMIS and participating in HMIS. I know, that's the whole citywide problem. If you don't have to report in HMIS, you usually don't. So yeah.
What, if any, are the arguments against this?
Sorry, I did not hear you. You broke up.
What, if any, are the arguments against this? Why would we not enthusiastically say yes?
Is from outreach workers that just feel it's an additional burden. And they say, well, we do it with our clients, but not with everybody else. But then my counter argument is, well, how do you select your clients if you do any type of assessment anyway? So why not then include this in an assessment to determine who you're working with as a caseload? And just a rough estimate, the ask is really, and I did make a list of and came up with 40 full-time employees at a handful of, at our regular outreach groups. And it's an opportunity, and I would assume 25 to 30 assessments a month, just to get everybody in, and then that will go down a little every month, so.
I think a counter argument is a no gain mentality, because people are putting them in HMIS and then they don't see the big picture. They think there's no real benefit to the client in that regard. They're asking the client a lot of personal questions. What we do here, we're definitely all about getting data into the system. So we don't put in everybody that we encounter, I would say, but we do put in anybody that we provide any kind of a service. So if we're signing them up for something, they're in there. And maybe we can look at trying to get everybody we encounter, but then, it's just a lot of work, and that's a lot of, they end up timing out of HMIS anyway because nobody's seen them in 90 days. And yeah, so that's the counter side of it. But I do think it should be strongly encouraged. I'm on board.
And Jesse, I think you just really focused on, it's a mind shift we're going through right now, organizations, because our HMS has frankly just not been functional for years and years because we didn't do data sharing. Organizations are now slowly starting to see the benefit when data sharing happens within HMAS. So we are in this mindset right now, which is why I'm here. I think this push is necessary, just to let people know how folks benefit, and not just necessarily lingering in a database.
And in conversations like one we just had with Katie, where she asked, do you know how many people you how many contacts you had with people in 2020 who are experiencing chronic homelessness. That's something that we can track and we could track, but we absolutely didn't historically. So questions like that from her and other reports that we work with HUD. Sorry, go ahead, Molly.
That's okay. Do we want to make this more explicit in a couple ways? Are you saying, Judy, you want organizations to be entering people that everyone they meet and encounter into HMIS? Because right now it doesn't specify that. And then 2, do you want to make it more specific to coordinated entry and like the special street outreach projects? Because to me, that was the gap, right? Park Center had been doing coordinated entry, but we didn't realize we needed to do a special project for our different grants. Well, for some of them. So we want to make it more specific in those 2 ways.
I'm absolutely open to that. You nailed it. Yes, on both.
And I agree what people have said. It is an extra burden for our outreach workers. And luckily we were able to hire Ash, who's our data entry coordinator for our SAMHSA grant, and for ESG, we recently hired someone. So I just wonder what is MHID or Metro Social Services or doing to support organizations, especially like the all volunteer outreach organizations, to spend time and have individuals tasked to entering this data, because it is double entry for a lot of people. So is there any financial support there?
When you say financial support, what do you, I mean, we offer a lot of training, we offer a lot of help. I think it's
financial support to hire a data entry coordinator to do that double entry, because our outreach workers have to enter into our medical record system at Park Center. And previously, people then had to double enter into HMIS. But like for the SAMHSA grant, we have Ash doing that for all of our outreach workers. We have Brenna for the ESG grant now. It's time for our workers to do the double entry.
That's something I think that COC dollars can be looked at. That's kind of for the COC to look at how in the, that's something you want to look at to discuss. That would be my recommendation on that.
If I could say really quickly too that Rachel and I are working to make a few changes in the data entry workflow that will be putting a lot of information out soon that are going to make your overall data entry easier once we pull some of the functionality that we built into coordinated entry back out. It's going to make data entry into coordinated entry and street outreach at the same time very seamless. And at the end of that workflow, you're really going to be clicking less times than before. We're going to have lots of training available for that process and change. And the thing that I keep saying is that what Judy said, this is not a data ask, this is a mindset shift in how we think about HMIS, because historically we have only used it as far as HUD requires it, and we can see that that becomes not beneficial for us. It's not helpful for us to then evaluate our system. And as a community, I think it would be a motivator to want to be able to confidently say what the issue is in our community, so that we can make big asks of the federal government, state level, local level, and get the resources that we need in our community. And right now we can't confidently state the problem. So just adding that, I think my main point was that we're going to make it as easy as possible.
And circling back on that, hopefully we get then also, with some more resources. That's kind of then where the ask needs to come from, with the consolidated application, to see how that, to get more data, to manage more data, we need more data entries. And we're in the same boat with you. We're minimally staffed, and I continue asking for dollars on that as well.
So could we also work on?
It's important to look at is whether or not. Sorry, my focus got now. Is whether or not we are able to get more admin funds in the grants that we get. I hate saying that because I always want more money to go directly to the people that need it. But in order for us to get this, I think Molly is right. We need more staff that are dedicated to data.
Can we also work on getting data systems to talk to each other so that people don't have to do data entry, double entry?
I am actually, so the HMS Oversight Committee is informed. We're just starting conversation for a small pilot to look at that and what that would look like. Have all the information yet, but that's something for maybe in 2 months we will know if it, what it could look like. And so we're in conversations exploring.
We're also continuing conversations with, I know some places have like a electronic medical record that they're required to enter into, but folks who have built their kind of case management software functionality into a separate platform, there is so much functionality within our HMIS that is unused, that case management part and tracking services and things like that, that we will continue to have conversations with folks about using this platform as your main data collection spot, to kind of get rid of that need to put it in 2 places if it's not absolutely necessary. Because we know that does, even if you don't have to double enter in our system anymore, it is a big undertaking to put it in 2 places. So we would love for you to not have to do that.
So I'm wondering if we should maybe, do you need a vote from us? I'm just realizing it's 10:30 and I know I have to go to another meeting. So I love this idea. I think it's great. I'm wondering and hopeful that as we continue with the gaps analysis too, it can be an accompanying kind of call to action or ROI on why putting this in would be helpful. So I think that's helpful in messaging and trying to shift mindset. So I don't know if we should do a roll call and vote. Okay. Do you want to go for it, Molly? I know you did.
No, go ahead. Did we get confirmation that we do need the vote? That's what I'm not. I think you're asking it, right?
Yeah, I think Susie's shaking her head.
So I can make the motion that we support this and send it to the HCC.
Okay. I'll second. All right. So I guess I'll just read down the list here. Ash Poole.
Support.
Beth Shin.
Yes.
Catherine Knowles.
Yes.
Julie Thacker.
Yes.
Martina Condrone. Sorry.
Yes.
Molly Mindbreeze.
Yes.
Molly Richard.
Yes.
Rachel Cook. Oh, sorry. TJ Swanson.
Absolutely, yes.
And Jesse Call.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm a yes, so. Sorry, I didn't mean to move us forward. I just have to go to another meeting. I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this, and this makes it just that much easier for us to push and make it a community ask and bring the community together. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being part of both of these really important discussions. We will see you all in a month. Please be safe on the roads if you get out.
Thanks all. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.